Welcome to the Media Roundtable Industry Edition, where we dive into the secrets of the craft of audio advertising and provide our perspective on industry topics in service of marketers responsible for the success of their audio program, the Chief Audio Officer. I'm your host, Stew Redwine, and VP Creative Services at Oxford Road, and today we are joined by some of our favorite people. There is no question. James Ingrassia, EVP of Client Services.
Hello, greetings. Glad to be back.
So good to be back on the show with you. Neal Lucey, EVP of Strategy and Product.
Stu, it's great to be back. It's been a while since I've been on an industry edition, so I'm looking forward to it.
No kidding, likewise. And James Cridland, our favorite audio futurologist and editor of Podnews and Podcast Business Journal.
That's easy for you to say. Well, good morning, as it is for me here. It's great to be back.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. So welcome to the show. And we're going to be discussing some quick takes on content news. Neal is back on Spotify. No, not the Neal on this podcast. He never left. The other Neal. The latest podcast spin forecast. Spoiler alert, podcasting is still growing. Spotify and the IAB branded podcasts, it seems they work according to Signal Hill Insights. And potential big news for marketers that are interested in leveraging sports audio. All right, let's break down this week's top industry news stories. To begin, a few quick honorable mentions. Neal.
All right, I will go. Neil Young, if you remember going back into the COVID days, he and Joni Mitchell, I think were two of the most outspoken who came off of Spotify when they were concerned about some of the things that Joe Rogan was saying on his podcast. And so they said it's either him or us, and Spotify chose Joe Rogan. Go figure, they were paying him a lot of money. They make a lot of money off of him. So it's been years now that they've been boycotting the Spotify service because of Joe Rogan, and now they're back. They're back on Spotify, and I'm kind of amused by this. I mean, I think they got a lot of news when they went off of Spotify. I'm not sure. I mean, I think there was news to us in the industry, probably not as big news to maybe folks outside of the audio industry. So I'm amused by it. I'm amused that he took a dig at Spotify, calling their service low res. So it's not the quality that the music is recorded on, but it's what people get. And the article, and this is the article on Yahoo, and it says the TIFF is a reminder that the tech giants always win. So I think that says a lot right there. Maybe they mostly always win. Maybe they don't always win, but it's hard to fight the platforms when they have so much power. Rogan is no longer exclusive to Spotify. You can get him on Apple. You can get him on YouTube. So what's Neil Young gonna do, or other artists? Are they gonna boycott those other services? Probably not. So, the boycott kind of makes less sense in the big scheme of things. And so they're back on Spotify now.
Well, there you go. The tech giants always win. And the fidelity issue, that's kind of interesting to me, James. I'm curious what your point of view is on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, Neil Young always comes over as being a bit of a grumpy old man, and I think he's right in terms of the fidelity that Spotify isn't particularly great, although my understanding is that they finally launched Spotify Hi-Fi, which they, if you remember, talked up about 3 years ago. Apparently it's available in beta now. Most people do not care. Most people simply don't care. As long as the content is good enough, then that's all that matters to them. But he's absolutely right in saying that, you can do a much better audio quality. I've been using Apple Music for the last couple of months, and the quality difference is noticeable even to my radio DJ damaged ears. So, so I think he's right in terms of that regard, but most people just don't care.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's like, you don't, when audio is better and it's like higher quality, it's invisible. You don't understand you're experiencing that it's better. And there is a threshold of bad that's like so bad it's not listenable. You can't listen to it. But in the middle there, it's like that perception. I'm right there with you as you go from okay to like excellent, really great audio is invisible. So people don't know it, but I think you can feel it, and quality is something that does matter out there. And I think that's what's going on. This next story that we got is Theo Von, the next Joe Rogan. So quick summary of the article. Theo Von, a comedian with a popular podcast, in case anybody didn't know, shares insights akin to a preacher, delving into existential themes with a Southern drawl. Despite parallels with Joe Rogan's format, Von's podcast this past weekend explores deeper spiritual and philosophical realms, pondering solitude, divine presence, and the allure of darkness. My take on it is this is a awesome example of a podcast that connects with audiences on a deeper emotional level. Like, that is what he's doing. He's putting things into words for people that maybe don't feel like they have a voice, or just, and I know you guys know what I mean by this. It's like, there's something about these people that are so excellent at the spoken word that they finally say something just the way that you would say it, but you would never be able to say it. But when they say it, you're like, yeah, I've always felt that. I've always thought that. Like, that's what this guy's doing. And he's leveraging audio's intimate nature to explore these meaningful themes and make people feel like they're part of the conversation. And I think part of his magic is that he doesn't take himself too seriously, obviously. And that's key, right? Because even when he's discussing like heavy stuff, he keeps things engaging with his distinct personality and his humor. And that's the power of audio, right? It pulls you and it makes you think and feel in a way that other mediums can't. And so I think he's a natural. Is he the next Rogan? It's kind of like, I love that. There's that old proverb that's like, when you die, God's not going to ask you why you weren't Moses. He's going to ask you why you weren't you. It's like, I don't know about that, but is he decidedly Theo Von, and is he reaching a ton of people in a way that really matters and resonates? Absolutely. James, curious to get your point of view.
Yeah, I think it's just interesting because I know Theo Von from Road Rules when he was the contestant in the first season. And so to hear him like be this big podcast now is kind of funny to me. But there's a lot of people who don't know him from Road Rules because they probably weren't even born yet at that time. But it's interesting to see his take. I know when he first came out with the podcast, he tried to be really outlandish and have like really shocking guests on and be like that shock jock type of podcaster. But then I think after he got the attention and then he started getting the respect, he's now zeroing in on a lane that he's starting to ride down. So it'll be interesting to see what happens down the road. We are working with a few clients on his show, and it's mixed results, but mostly on the good side. It does take a little while to get some traction going, but as long as he can keep his advertisers happy and his listeners growing, I think he's on a good track.
Yeah, he definitely is. And it's funny, like with the similarities to Joe Rogan, like you think Fear Factor or whatever, it's like, what is the alchemy that turns these people into podcasters and allows them to make these connections? But we know one thing that definitely works is rewatch podcasts. And I know we have another article on that, on one in particular from you, James.
Yeah, it was from Seventh Heaven. Has a new rewatch podcast right now. So I never watched Seventh Heaven, but I know the Camdens and all the memes that you see online now about them. However, I don't know. I have a very mixed feeling about this whole rewatch podcast for Seventh Heaven, because as an agency, we used to have a category of rewatch that would work for some clients, but then we learned that like some did and some didn't work. And usually it was the ones that were more intellectual, maybe. It's like the West Wing, it was the Office Ladies, it was the high production value, it was Scrubs, it's all of those Fake Doctors, Real Friends. Those worked really well, but then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, this like barrage of 90210 and the OC and Saved by the Bell and all these other ones came out, and then they just petered off here. So I see this one living squarely in the middle. I don't know if it's going to be a huge hit because I feel like you have to be a very certain type of person to be a Seventh Heaven diehard. And I don't know if that person is a podcast diehard now. I don't know. Neal, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm interested in the phenomenon, right? Because I think to some degree, there's a longing for what used to be primetime television. And I think like these shows have disappeared. So This Is Us is, I don't know, maybe the last great drama that's been on primetime television in the US. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there'll ever be another This Is Us. Now there's All of Us, I think. I think that's the name of it.
That was us.
What it was us. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think of it as somewhat like these are filling a gap in where people want that primetime television experience and they're no longer getting it. Maybe not all of them will be successful, but I find it interesting that there's so many of them. And Office Ladies, how long has Office Ladies been around now? I think.
Yeah, I don't even know if they do episodes anymore. Like,
yeah, it's like it's been 7 years.
Yeah.
How can it? I think it's been around for 7 years now, something like that.
It has been, but also like this show's been off the air since 2007, Seventh Heaven. So like you have to capitalize on people who have that much of a connection to something that aired, what, 16, 17 years ago now? But
all right, I I'm thinking about my wife, and so when I'm waiting for the Gilmore Girls, or maybe they already have it.
I think they do have that one, but
they do.
I think they do.
Of course they do. They would have to.
So yeah, it seems like the industry is growing. I mean, does that mean, Neal, like, have there been any recent headlines about ad revenue growing too?
Oh, a little bit. It always seems that there's headlines about ad revenue growing, or that the industry is in the state of flux, or something's happening. So depending on the week, the day, podcast is doing really, really well, or the glory days are behind us. But I think we can pretty well say that the glory days are still in front of us for podcasting. So we have a new forecast. Podcast ad revenue is expected to grow 16% this year, and expecting to top 3 billion in 2027. This is from the latest eMarketer report, and they're projecting podcast ad revenue to hit 2.3 billion this year alone. Podcasting is claiming nearly 1/3 of all digital audio spend in 2024. So it's still growing. Digital audio overall is growing and offsetting minor declines, not huge declines, but traditional radio is declining, and but on the flip side, digital audio is growing. So the overall audio industry is growing, but the digital audio is offset to some degree by the decline in traditional radio spend. So it's just an opportunity area for marketers, opportunity to capture time spent. And I think, for me, the hot take is, let's repeat that digital audio represents a significant amount of time spent. And even audio in general, you include radio, about 1/4 of our time spent with media is with audio. Now, some of that is subscription-based audio, of course, but only about 5% of ad spend goes to audio channels in the US. So, there is a big opportunity. I'm not naive enough to think that, okay, 1/4 of time spent, you should get 1/4 of ad spend. A lot more goes into marketing decisions than that. But I think there is a disconnect that audio is really not getting near its fair share of ad spend that it could be getting, especially given the effectiveness of the channels, the reach that you can get with radio, the effectiveness of podcasting, all of it. So I think there's a lot of upside still to go with audio, and I think marketers hopefully will catch up to that.
And James, what about you? What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, looking at these figures, I mean, firstly, they're from eMarketer, and eMarketer is very opaque in terms of where it gets its figures. I've yet to meet anybody who works with figures, who works with research that gives them any credence whatsoever. So I would look at these numbers and I would go, I don't really know where these numbers are from. Normally, if you take a look at the Edison Research figures and then you look at eMarketer, it looks as if somebody has basically looked at the Edison Research figures and changed a couple of numbers and just made a new graph out of it. So I'm rather more interested in seeing what the IAB's numbers are going to be. The IAB has released total numbers for audio online, but not yet released the podcast numbers. So those come out on May the 9th. So those come out on May the 9th, which of course is IAB Podcast Upfronts Day. And it'll be interesting to see what's going on there. I also don't necessarily look at forecasts, and I'm wondering whether on May the 9th, I do that miserable job of going through all of the IAB's old forecasts to work out how wrong they were. I don't think I'm going to do that, but I'm much more interested in actuals, much more interested in trending, and certainly we should hit $2 billion for last year, but let's wait and see what the real figures from the IAB say. I think, but I think when you look at these the numbers which are being talked about at the moment, then they're all based on an eMarketer article, and the IAB's figures are the gold standard for this sort of thing. So always worth looking at what the IAB says.
Well, so it's funny to hear you say that, right? The IAB is a gold standard, but it seems like it's not for Spotify anymore. So what is up with that?
Well, so Spotify is very quietly left the IAB at the beginning of this year. The IAB wouldn't tell me when they left, nor would Spotify. But in terms of that essentially means two things. Firstly, it means that Spotify themselves aren't at the table anymore in terms of working out what the podcast measurement guidelines are and those sorts of things. But also it means that Spotify's individual podcast companies are no longer certified. They last underwent certification in 2020. I bet lots of people have touched their code since. So you would question how certified those companies are right now anyway, but they've been removed from the official list of compliant companies. So that includes Spotify's Megaphone, Spotify for Podcasters, who we know as Anchor, and Chartable as well. All three of those have been pulled off that list, which is quite a thing. So Spotify still say that they're compliant, but we just kind of have to trust their word in terms of that. But that is a big, big company that has now left the IAB in terms of measurement, left the IAB in terms of being a member as well. And I wonder what that means for the long-term future for the IAB.
Well, I'm sure, Neal, you've got some questions. I'm curious, James, though, how does this impact the front lines of what you're doing with the accounts and with media day in and day out?
It's very fresh news. And so we have just been telling our clients that we've been monitoring it. Spotify is a little bit of a black box. I was going to say Pandora's box. That would be a little weird to say, but a little black box and how it all works. But I mean, they say that they're on, like other James said, we have to kind of just take their word for it, that everything is on the up and up here. And, it really kind of gets into accountability and making sure that what we purchase is what actually runs. And that's really the ultimate metric there. So until we have any reason to think that that's not the case, it's business as usual.
Yeah, and what questions come to mind for you, Neal, when you think about this?
Yeah, I think one thing is, and I I think, James, you did a really good job of explaining it, that the compliance doesn't mean, like, with certification comes auditing, I believe, to make sure that you're actually abiding by the rules. So you can say you're compliant, but if there's no auditing, there's you're judging your own homework, right?
I mean, I think there are things that the IAB measurement guidelines measure, and a lot of people have been looking at download numbers and listener numbers as being the two important ones here. But actually, the ad delivery side, which Megaphone was certified for and is no longer certified for, is a real concern, I think, to this community, to people who are listening to this show, because what that essentially means is that Spotify isn't certified for the indications that it is given your DAI platform that someone has actually heard your ad. The ad delivery certification has gone, and so it really, Spotify is now firing that particular signal kind of when it likes. I'm sure that nothing has changed specifically, but you look at that and you think that is a very important metric. That is a very important piece of data, which essentially underpins the way that this industry charges, and that is no longer being certified.
Well,
the one question I would ask is, Spotify have stopped doing two things. They've stopped being a member, and being a member was very, very expensive. I mean, I was working out how expensive that might have been, and you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you're also having a look at Spotify stopping the certification and getting recertified, even if you're not a member, because you don't need to be a member to be certified. Even if you're not a member, to get certified is 12 grand. I mean, it's nothing. So you kind of wonder why Spotify hasn't at least recertified under the rules, even if they're not going to continue as an IAB member. And I don't know the answer to that. And I also don't know, other James, why, given that Spotify, we know that Spotify wasn't a member in late February, why they haven't bothered to tell any of the clients, any of the people who are hosting on their platform, that they are no longer compliant. That to me, or no longer certified, I should say, that to me is a bit strange. Why would they be, ultra quiet about that?
I'm not sure why, but I think what's going to come down is just to performance. We've had other networks do non-traditional things before, and the performance has the last word. So what you're saying, ads aren't firing when they're supposed to, then we're going to know that, and our clients' performance are going to be bad, and we're going to have to pull off of those shows. So I think just time will tell when it comes down to whether this is a major rift in the podcast industry or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say that we work with Podscribe for, I mean, they're auditing a whole range of different aspects of podcasting, right? And I think that just speaks to the importance of having a service like Podscribe, that you're getting that third party kind of verification of some form, that your ads are being delivered, that they're read according to how you want them read, that they're being separated from competitors, all of that. So I think it raises the importance of a service like Podscribe.
And they are certified as well.
Okay, pop quiz. Have you ever heard of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John. We could go on. I don't just host the Media Roundtable podcast, but I have the good fortune of being the CEO of a company called Oxford Road, where we are the world's leading independently owned and operated agency specializing in audio. Think podcasts, radio, and streaming. And what that means is that we get to help great companies worth fighting for, grow with audio advertising, whether it's podcasts, radio, or streaming, and all its various tentacles. This includes media planning and buying. We do analytics, attribution, and insights. We also have a special way that we deal with creative and copy generation. It's our own proprietary process called Audiolytics that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Bottom line is we don't just work here. Audio is our passion, and we want to lead this industry to new heights beyond what we've ever seen so far. That's why we've been leading the industry in brand safety and suitability and actually bringing you solutions to market so that you can evaluate the way that you get placed in a show so that it matches up with your values, in addition to avoiding the things that you know might be problematic for your brand. If you're a chief audio officer and you're looking to get best in market performance at maximum viable scale, do get in touch with us at oxfordroad.com. Or if you love audio and are strategic, relentless, and looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as a fellow agent of influence. Just flip us your resume through oxfordroad.com. And if you're working anywhere in the audio industry and you're serious about this business, make sure you go to oxfordroad.com. Easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, at oxfordroad.com. And make sure you mention that you heard about us on the Media Roundtable podcast.
I do have a question for you, James, because, it's more of it's maybe the ex-US perspective, outside of the US perspective. In the US, we have the IAB, then we have the Radio Advertising Bureau. They had there's the National Association of Broadcasters had their conference a week or so ago. So we have like these varying entities, but there's no one audio, there's no one audio body. Are we just doing our own thing in the US? Are we dysfunctional, or is that how?
Well, two different questions. We are dysfunctional, but yeah. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly say if you look at the UK, you look at Finland, for example, or here in Australia, there are organizations which are specifically around audio. So in the UK, it's Radio Centre. In Finland, it's Radio Media. Here in Australia, Commercial Radio and Audio is their name. And they are very much morphing into complete audio industries, associations, and they seem to shout about audio an awful lot. And what worries me about the IAB is, they're also doing video ads, they're doing ad banners, they're doing, all kinds of other things. The NAB is all to do with TV and radio broadcasting and that kind of stuff. The RAB has nothing to do with podcasting either. And so, I've been calling for a podcast advertising bureau in the US for some time, and frankly, globally, why not? Because I think you can see, certainly from the success of the industry in Australia, in the UK, in other places, you can see that it really helps if you've got a specific industry association which is around audio and educating advertisers, educating creatives, how you do audio, educating all of that kind of side. I think that's a hugely important side. And really, with a podcast advertising bureau, perhaps that would be something that Spotify would be interested in taking part in, and something that would actually stop, different parts of the industry splintering off and doing their own thing. So to me, that would be a super helpful thing. I don't suppose we'll see it anytime soon, but I think that would be a really helpful thing as the industry continues to grow up.
Yeah, I'm jealous of what the Radio Centre provides for the UK market in terms of research, right? Just overarching research.
Yeah, I mean, the research is super good. And also, Commercial Radio Australia runs the Australian podcast ranker. They have a podcast steering group, which is everyone in the ranker. So it's not just radio broadcasters, it's everybody. And they meet very regularly as well. And I think, all of that stuff just shows that there is definitely something there in terms of the audio industry having its own association to push that particular part of advertising forward. And I think that that's a great thing.
Yeah, it's always outstanding when we do international campaigns, when we work with a country that has something like that in place, because it's a one-stop shop where you can get all of your answers. But it's good signs. Podcasting is growing up, and I think it's turning into its parents. So hopefully that continues to evolve in a good direction. One area that definitely is evolving, what we've learned. This next article is what we've learned about what makes a successful branded podcast. Branded podcasts are surging alongside podcast popularity, with ad revenue projected to grow by 26% in 2023. We'll ask James Cridland to validate those numbers, obviously. What I'm seeing here is I'm glad to see more brands are investing in branded podcasts as the medium continues to explode in popularity. And when they're done right, like I think of the Trader Joe's one, kind of the OG, they can fuel incredible audience engagement and brand affinity. The keys are to have a crystal clear purpose, I think, behind it, to find that sweet spot between your brand identity and what listeners are passionate about. And most importantly, commit to providing a unique entertainment value, truly, right? Like, it needs to be good. You can't just churn out glorified ads and expect people to care about that. And that said, branded podcasts aren't for everyone. They require significant time, creativity, and consistency to pull them off. Many brands are better off advertising on established podcasts that align with their target audience. So it's not like just jump on the bad wagon because you've got some people and you can throw them at it and like, we'll just do a podcast. It's like, we got a mic, we could just do it. It's like, be thoughtful about it. Why are you doing it? But regardless, I encourage, all the chief audio officers listening and marketers listening to spend more time seriously exploring audio's potential, whether that's the branded podcast, sonic branding, or simply applying more craft to the ads that they're creating. Like we were talking about, it accounts for a huge and growing share of consumer attention, but it's underutilized for a lot of people. And the old saying definitely rings true that fortune favors the bold in the audio space. Like I said, like with Trader Joe's, that they took that swing at that. But so like James, like when you look at all of our clients, is it just like, hey, anyone, you should do a branded podcast, or is it about taking a thoughtful, measured approach? Like, how do you look at it? Like, why is every one of our clients not doing a branded podcast?
What's actually funny is that a lot of our clients have podcasts and they're on the website if you look for them. However, some of them are internal for the staff. And if they leak, they leak. There's nothing proprietary in them. But to actually do a consumer-facing branded podcast, you have to know what you're doing and be dedicated to it and be in it for the long haul. This isn't something where you're going to record 5 episodes and then call it quits for 6 months. You have to actually have a whole plan and want to do it, just like the fabled Trader Joe's podcast. Like, that just keeps going because that is a fan favorite grocery store out there. So you have to have the right product to have people actually want to listen. And when people listen, then you're able to get inspired to create the content for it. So I think it's a very, very niche field, but when done right, it can be very incredible.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I mean, we work with Dave Beesing at Sound That Brands that does the Trader Joe's podcast, and just in talking with them about it, it's like part of the magic of that one is that Trader Joe's is already qualified as a brand that has very much a cult to it, so that made a lot of sense to then, like their newspaper, they were already doing all of the stuff that makes their podcast good stuff.
Right.
So that's what I think of, which is, bolsters the point you're making. Just don't just throw spaghetti at the wall. I mean, Neal, what do you say?
I mean, I say that for companies, I think the one, probably the biggest thing is commitment, right? Commitment to consistency. So if you're going to say, hey, we're going to do a podcast and then record an episode or a few, and, oh, we didn't get listenership, we tried it, it didn't work. It doesn't, I think you really have to make a commitment to putting out a podcast on a regular basis. The more you put it out, the more you do it consistently, the better it will get, and it will become more valuable. But don't expect that we're going to come out with a podcast and all of a sudden the listeners are going to show up. It's a build. It's a slow build. I mean, Stew, you've been doing Ad Infinitum now, like how do you, how has it gone from the first episodes to where you are now, right? Like, I'd imagine it's gotten better, just like our Media Roundtable podcast hopefully have gotten better over time because we're consistent and we're committed to it.
Yes, exactly. And I think, and we have a better understanding of our audience and what it, what it is that we're delivering and why anybody would want to listen. I'm curious, James, if you've got an additional point of view when it comes to branded podcasts and their rise.
I mean, branded podcasts are supremely interesting, and I think there was a branded podcast conference, a virtual one, only last week, and got an awful lot of people, interested in that as well. I think it's a fascinating side of the industry, and I think it's a side where it's rather harder to look at advertising in those branded shows because they are branded shows specifically to advertise a specific thing. So I think, it's interesting seeing how that fits with the wider world of the way that we monetize shows. But always fascinating to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and it seems like something that works so well with on-demand audio, where it's like trying to imagine this. Like I know, but like there have been different branded things. Like there's a whole world out there like 20, 30 years ago of branded musicals where people were doing entire musicals that brands were paying for. But thinking of like a brand, oh, it's incredible. It's incredible. And you can like get vinyls of the shows. But I'm saying it's like imagining a place that this could live in the past. It's harder, but now like it makes a lot of sense. And I think of Louis has a podcast called Everyone Hates Marketers, and it's a very niche podcast, and kind of like what you're saying, Neal, like with Ad Infinitum or even this podcast, like they're branded podcasts and they're very niche and they're very focused, and those can be very successful in this medium, which explains the growth here. But again, it's like, if you're going to do it at the highest level you can and commit to it for a long time, because there's just magic with audio that the longer you're committed to it, the better it works. It's incredible to me. And then our last story in audio news is from James.
Yeah.
What is going on in the wild world of sports, James?
Wild world of sports, my alma mater, Audacy, formerly Entercom, formerly CBS Radio, formerly Infinity Broadcasting, has announced Audacy Sports. And I kind of chuckled to myself a little bit here because my last hurrah when I was at Entercom was to create radio.com sports, which was the aggregation of all of our sports radio stations, play-by-play properties, podcast streams, talent, events under one platform. And we had shirts and mugs and properties and sales pitches and sponsors and all that. Very successful. When Entercom changed the name to Audacy, obviously that went away, and radio.com went away into Audacy. So this is now a second swing at this, which I'm really excited about because it makes sense. Audacy is the leader in local sports out there. Others might say that, but they have a lot of national properties on that end. But Audacy has the local play-by-play with the most local talent talking about the local team sports. So aggregating it all for advertisers into a single ad vertical is very, very, very smart, especially since the days when I was there. They've grown so many new podcasts and new platforms, and sports betting's taken off. So there's a lot of new tentacles that advertisers can take control of. For marketers thinking about getting into this, I think you just have to decide whether you want a national, regional, or uber local level of alignment with these sports, because Audacy can offer pretty much all of them through their fan engagement on the local level, through regional buys, through teams that might commute in from a few states away, or just every sport nationally across all leagues. I think it's a very, very smart move for them, and I'm glad to see that the old aggregation trick is back at it with them.
You were ahead of the curve, it sounds like.
Yeah, I guess so.
What comes to mind to me with this also is like, it's like, we'll, customize creative across, and now we have the tools with, as the AI generated stuff, that you could do this massive buy, show up in all these places, but you've also got the ability to customize your creative where it's going to be shown up, as opposed to just using the same place everywhere. The same creative in every place.
One note on that though, Stu, and that's the advantage at Audacy is that they have local sports talent. So if you want to reach Yankees fans or Dodgers fans, you don't even need AI to do it because you have the talent in those markets who can do the customization for you when it comes down to delivering that message. So it's very interesting to see. Now, of course, when you do streaming or other national podcast buys, yes, the customization would have to be relying on AI. But I mean, sports is hot right now, and never really wasn't. But it's a good place for them to be, and I think that marketers can definitely achieve their sports alignment goals by taking a chance on this one.
I have a question for James, given that you were at every permutation of what is now Audacy, I think, at some point in your career. I love the announcement. I love creating a sports vertical podcast with the local coverage. As a planner buyer, it's like, are you going to make it easier for me to buy it? Are you going to make it easier? Am I going to be able to see kind of like the delivery across platforms? So could I see like how the overall delivers across podcasts, in local radio, even national radio? I didn't see a lot. I mean, it was really an announcement PR piece. So who knows what will come from it, but that's what I would want to see. I'm curious, like, what you think will come from it.
This is definitely a packaging play. Years ago, all the radio stations and all the local markets kind of operated independently, and there was very little connection between the two. Now that Audacy kind of got rid of the radio.com name and everything is just Audacy now, it's all one umbrella. It's meant for consumers to have less confusion in the market, but also for marketers and advertisers to have ease of buying. So unless things have changed that I'm not aware of, it should be much easier to get one big umbrella view of where everything ran and how everything's pacing and how all your goals are being met.
Yeah,
James?
and I think it's interesting when you have a look into the UK. There's a company which is called Ad Infinitum over there, which runs the trading desk for commercial radio. And they have just launched a thing called Audio Lab, which they're calling a cross-platform metrics tool, which is specifically looking at cross-platform audio measurement. So you can have a look at both radio and podcasting and streaming and as much of that as you possibly can, which I think is interesting. So whether or not that's going on in the Audacy world, I don't know, but interesting to see that there is a cross industry service happening in the UK. And also this week, we've seen the launch of iHeart, #1 for podcasts in the US, launching a women's sports podcast network, and audio network, because they're also doing women's audio on radio and in other things as well. And I thought that to me is really interesting, in that is a niche that has been growing and growing and growing for the last 4 or 5 years, and we've really seen nobody really, taking that and making that into its own network. So I thought that was an interesting side to actually see that the iHeartMedia folks, they call it the world's first ever women's sports network. Don't know about that, so I always write the words claims that in front of that kind of thing, but to me makes perfect sense. So an awful lot going on in the wonderful wide world of sport.
Yeah, speaking of women's sports, so the NCAA women's final outperformed the NCAA men's final in terms of viewership. So
there you go.
That's a big deal now. The NCAA women's final was on ABC, so it was over the air broadcast. And the NCAA men's final was on TBS or TNT, one or the other. So it was on cable, which has a smaller and smaller footprint in the US. So there is a asterisk with that, but there's certainly growing popularity in women's sports, and it's great to see. And then I do have a little bit of a fun story. So I think tapping into the local personalities in sports radio can be very valuable for brands. Now, most brands will not be able to do what a brand that I worked on had done. So I used to work on the 76 business, and Vin Scully would do their reads. He read them and Mercedes-Benz. I think there is one or two. I think those are the only two that he did. And I remember, like, he sent over a recording and he said, like, oh, I hope this is good enough. And we were like, that's Vin Scully. Vin Scully. And the copywriter is like, Vin Scully read my words. Like, how cool is that, right? So, I mean, you're not always going to get Vin Scully. There's only one Vin Scully. But tapping into that local connection that those hosts have is, there's a lot of value there.
Yeah. He doesn't have to, when it is the one and only Vin Scully. It's not claims to be. He absolutely is the real article. And that is just, I love hearing that he asked if it was good enough. Because the more time I spend in this, and the folks that are household names and really focus on doing their best work, that's the attitude they bring to the work. And I see that time and time again. So great episode. That's all the time we've got today. Before we go, let's recap. So this is what I'm getting. Podcast ad spending continues to grow. So ignore the naysayers. The largest ad player walks away from IAB. Who's next? And just to remind everyone, the IAB has played a critical role in podcasting and setting the standards that most publishers follow to this day. And James is definitely calling our attention to watch this one. What is this an indicator of? So more will be revealed. Branded podcasts have value, but that doesn't mean that they are for every brand. Like we talked about, it works if you work it, if you're committed to it and committed to doing it excellently with excellence. And Audacy, it's about time putting all this together. But I was also wondering, just from your story, James, can you help us out? Can you help the Media Roundtable out with like shirts and cups and swag like you did?
Yeah, we can get some Media Roundtable swag.
Okay. All right. Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable. As always, such a great time. And thank you, listeners. We hope that this helps you make the ads work better than ever. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We would love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com, spelled just like it sounds. And little plug for our creative-focused podcast, Ad Infinitum, is hosted by yours truly, Stew Redwine. And I recommend you start at episode 1 to get a better understanding of what makes audio ads work and how that they can work better. We're in our second season now. Each episode breaks down real recent audio ads from top spenders across podcasts, radio, streaming, even Sirius XM. And our episodes feature expert guests like Amanda DeMarco from Veritonic, Dallas Taylor, who's the host of 20,000 Hertz, Richard Schotten, author of The Choice Factory, Joel Beckerman, the founder of Made Music Studio, and even hosts like Jordi Mysalis of the Midas Touch Network. Like I said, season 2 of Ad Infinitum is underway now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave a honest 5-star review. Thank you to our guests and to Bianca, Kyle, Haley, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.